Imagine the scene. The year is 146 BC, and Corinth, the brilliant jewel of ancient Greece, is burning. Smoke, thick and black, billows from the roofs of magnificent marble temples and from the once bustling agoras where philosophers and statesmen walked. The city's brutal and systematic destruction at the hands of Roman legions marked the definitive end of Greek independence and heralded the dawn of absolute Roman dominance in the Mediterranean world. But how did it come to this? How did Rome, once a modest city-state on the Italian peninsula, come to conquer the very cradle of Western civilization? The story of Rome's conquest of Greece is a long and complex one, a saga that spans an entire century and is filled with epic wars, shrewd diplomacy, and unexpected cultural exchanges that would forever change both societies. From the stormy shores of Illyria to the fateful battlefields of Cynocephaly, this great clash of empires would reshape the ancient world in ways that neither side could have possibly foreseen, setting the stage for a profound transformation that would echo through millennia. Our story begins not on the grand battlefields of Greece itself, but nearly a century earlier, on the choppy and unpredictable waters of the Adriatic Sea. In the year 230 BC, these waters churned with the swift ships of Illyrian pirates. These brazen seafarers, operating under the nominal reign of the formidable Queen Tutor, struck fear into the hearts of both Greek and Italian merchants, their lightning raids disrupting the vital flow of trade. Rome, a republic whose prosperity was increasingly tied to its commercial interests, viewed these piratical activities with a mounting and impatient concern. The Roman Senate, ever vigilant and keenly aware of the potential for wider regional instability, dispatched a diplomatic mission led by two brothers, Gaius and Lucius Coruncanius, to Queen Tutor's court to address the issue. The Romans, who were accustomed to dealing with more centralized and predictable powers, were reportedly taken aback by the fragmented nature of the Illyrian authority. Queen Tutor, while nominally in control, struggled to exert any real influence over the various tribal chieftains, who operated with a fierce and near-total autonomy along the coast. This diplomatic mission, intended to find a peaceful resolution, quickly and dramatically soured. When the Roman envoys delivered their protest against the relentless piracy, Queen Tutor's response was proud and dismissive. She argued with some justification that piracy was a time-honored custom among her people, and that she, as queen, had no legal authority to prevent her private citizens from seeking their fortunes upon the seas. This profound cultural misunderstanding, this clash between Roman law and Illyrian custom, would have fateful and bloody consequences. As the younger Roman envoy, Coruncanius, departed from the court, he delivered a final, fateful rebuke, a sharp warning that Rome itself would be compelled to force the Illyrians to reform their laws if their queen would not. Enraged by this challenge to her authority and the perceived insult to her people's traditions, Queen Tutor made a decision that would seal her fate and set Rome on its path to Eastern conquest. She ordered the assassination of the Roman diplomat. In the eyes of the Roman Senate, the murder of an official envoy was an unforgivable offense, a sacred line that could not be crossed. It provided the Romans with the perfect pretext, the casus belli, for a military intervention. It allowed Rome to position itself not as an aggressor, but as the noble defender of civilized norms and international law against what it could now frame as barbaric aggression. In the year 229 BC, the Roman war machine, honed by centuries of conflict in Italy and recently tested in the crucible of the First Punic War against Carthage, was unleashed. A punitive expedition, led by the consul Gnaeus Fulvius Centumalus, was dispatched across the Adriatic. The Roman force, comprising 20,000 disciplined infantry and 2,000 cavalry, quickly and overwhelmingly overwhelmed the desperate and disorganized Illyrian defenses. City after city fell to the Roman invaders, and many of the Greek settlements along the coast, which had long suffered under Illyrian oppression, welcomed the Romans as liberators. Facing imminent and total defeat, Queen Tutor sued for peace. The terms imposed by Rome were severe and uncompromising. The Illyrians were forced to pay a heavy tribute, surrender large swathes of their territory to Roman control, and, most importantly, cease all piratical activities. This swift and decisive victory had far-reaching implications that would ripple across the region for decades. Rome had now powerfully established itself as a major power to be reckoned with in the Greek world. The Senate's decision to intervene on behalf of the Greek cities had cleverly positioned Rome as a protector of Hellenic interests. As a result, many Greek city-states, or poleis, entered into a relationship of amicitia, or friendship, with Rome. While this fell short of a formal military alliance, it created a valuable network of grateful client states that would prove invaluable in Rome's future Eastern campaigns. The Illyrian Wars also set a crucial precedent for future Roman interventions. The Senate had now tasted the fruits of Eastern conquest and found them to be very sweet indeed. The relative ease with which the Roman legions had triumphed over the Illyrian forces emboldened the expansionist factions within the Roman elite. Moreover, the wars demonstrated Rome's growing naval capabilities. Control of the Adriatic was now firmly in Roman hands, providing a strategic springboard for further adventures to the east. As news of Rome's victory spread, it caught the wary attention of the major Hellenistic powers. The Kingdom of Macedon, in particular, viewed these developments with considerable alarm. Under its ambitious king, Philip V, Macedon had been working to reassert its own dominance over Greece, and the sudden appearance of a powerful new Western state on its very doorstep threatened to completely upset the delicate balance of power in the region. Of course, let's continue our story. As Rome celebrated its swift victory in Illyria, a new and far more formidable power was watching from the east. In the Kingdom of Macedon, the ambitious King Philip V saw not a protector of Greece, but a new rival. And when the Great Second Punic War erupted in 218 BC, sending shockwaves across the entire Mediterranean, Philip saw not a crisis, but a golden opportunity. The outbreak of the Second Punic War in 218 BC was a cataclysmic event that sent shockwaves through the entire Mediterranean, completely reshaping the political landscape and creating a host of new opportunities for ambitious rulers who were bold enough to seize them. Among those who saw a chance to dramatically expand their influence was Philip III of Macedon, a young and intensely energetic king who had ascended to the throne just 3 years earlier. As the Great Republic of Rome found itself locked in a desperate life-or-death struggle against the brilliant Carthaginian general, Hannibal, and his seemingly invincible forces, Philip recognized a unique and fleeting moment in history. He saw a golden opportunity to assert Macedonian dominance in the region, while Rome's attention was completely and fatally distracted by the war on its own soil. Philip's momentous decision to ally himself with Carthage was not made lightly or in haste. The Macedonian king had been carefully and shrewdly observing the unfolding conflict between Rome and Carthage, noting with particular interest the string of humiliating defeats that Rome had suffered at the Battle of the Trebia River and at Lake Trasimene. These severe and shocking blows to Roman military prestige led Philip and many others to perceive the Great Republic as far more vulnerable than anyone had previously imagined. He was also, it is said, encouraged in this assessment by a man named Demetrius of Pharos, a former ruler in the Adriatic who had been expelled from his lands by the Romans and now sought his revenge by stoking Philip's own considerable ambitions. The treaty that was forged between Philip V and Hannibal in the year 215 BC was a calculated and dangerous gamble, one aimed at dividing Roman attention and stretching its already strained resources to the breaking point. Philip, who was greatly emboldened by Hannibal's incredible string of successes in Italy, believed that this powerful new alliance with Carthage would provide him with the perfect cover to expand his own Macedonian influence westward across the Adriatic Sea. He cast his ambitious gaze upon the very territories that Rome had so recently wrested from Illyrian control. But what about Rome? Even while fighting for its very survival against Hannibal's army in Italy, the Roman Senate recognized the grave threat posed by a potential Macedonian invasion. In a move that demonstrated the incredible strategic acumen that would become a hallmark of Roman statecraft, the Senate moved swiftly and decisively to counter Philip's designs. But how could they possibly fight a major war on two fronts? Instead of attempting to face Macedon directly with their own legions, which were desperately needed elsewhere, Rome embarked on a shrewd and brilliant diplomatic campaign. Their goal was to isolate Philip and to contain his ambitions entirely within Greece itself, preventing him from ever crossing the Adriatic. Central to this clever strategy was the formation of alliances with the Greek states that had long chafed under Macedonian dominance and resented its power. Chief among these was the Aetolian League, a powerful confederation of city-states in central Greece that had a long and bitter history of conflict with Macedon. By aligning themselves with the Aetolians and other anti-Macedonian factions, the Romans effectively created a network of proxies, a Greek army that could engage Philip on their behalf, tying down his forces and consistently frustrating his plans for expansion. The First Macedonian War that resulted from these intricate machinations was characterized by its deeply indecisive and frustrating nature. It was not a war of grand pitched battles between the main powers. Instead, the conflict evolved into a grueling series of raids, counter-raids, and minor engagements. Neither side was able to land a knockout blow. Philip found his efforts to project his power beyond the borders of Greece consistently thwarted by Rome's new Greek allies, while the Roman-led coalition, in turn, lacked the strength to seriously threaten Macedon's core territories. After more than a decade of this inconclusive and exhausting fighting, both sides found themselves ready for a respite from the conflict. The war was formally concluded in the year 205 BC with a Peace of Phoinike, a treaty that essentially restored things to how they had been before the war began, a return to the status quo ante bellum. But while this agreement brought a temporary and welcome cessation of hostilities, it did little to address the deep, underlying tensions between the rising power of Rome and the ambitious kingdom of Macedon. The chessboard had merely been reset, setting the stage for the far more consequential and decisive conflicts that were destined to come. As the dust began to settle from the Second Punic War, the ambitions of the great powers in the ancient Mediterranean once again came into sharp focus. The fragile peace that had been established by the Treaty of Phoinike proved to be little more than a temporary and uneasy respite. Philip V of Macedon, a king who was undeterred by his recent setbacks and still harbored grand ambitions, resumed his aggressive and expansionist policies, particularly in the region of the Aegean Sea. This renewed push for dominance sent a wave of alarm through the smaller Hellenistic states, most notably the powerful kingdoms of Pergamon and Rhodes. They viewed Philip's relentless actions as a direct and existential threat to their own autonomy and to the fragile stability of the entire region. The growing concerns of these Greek states did not go unnoticed by the ever-watchful Roman Senate. While the Republic had been content to withdraw from the complexities of Greek affairs following the conclusion of the First Macedonian War, the escalating tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean began to draw their attention back once more. Philip V's determined attempts to dominate the Greek city-states and his aggressive military actions in the Aegean were seen in Rome as potential catalysts for a major shift in the balance of power, a shift that could ultimately threaten vital Roman interests. In the year 201 BC, these simmering tensions finally reached a boiling point. The kingdoms of Pergamon and Rhodes, feeling the immense pressure of Macedonian aggression, officially declared war on Philip V. Recognizing the formidable nature of their adversary, these states knew they could not face him alone, and so they made a crucial diplomatic maneuver that would prove to be a pivotal turning point in history. They sought to enlist the mighty Roman Republic as a powerful ally in their struggle. This desperate plea for help would succeed in drawing Rome back into the incredibly complex and treacherous web of Greek politics, setting the stage for a final, decisive confrontation with the Kingdom of Macedon. The Roman Senate, at first, was hesitant to commit to another major conflict, coming so soon after the long and bloody Second Punic War against Hannibal. But they eventually recognized the immense strategic importance of intervening to curb Macedonian power. In the year 200 BC, Rome officially declared war on Macedon, marking the beginning of the Second Macedonian War. The conflict, after years of maneuvering, finally culminated in the Great Battle of Cynocephali in 197 BC. Here, on the Dog's Head Hills of Thessaly, two of the ancient world's greatest military traditions would finally meet in a decisive, head-on clash. On one side stood the disciplined and adaptable Roman legions, commanded by the brilliant and charismatic general Titus Quinctius Flamininus. On the other side stood the legendary Macedonian phalanx, a tightly packed and seemingly invincible formation of soldiers wielding their long, deadly spears. The Sarissa, led by King Philip V himself. Flamininus, a master of strategy, refused to fight the phalanx on its own terms. He employed innovative and flexible tactics, using his light infantry to harass and create distractions, drawing the Macedonian phalanx forward onto uneven terrain, where its rigid formation would be a disadvantage. As the phalanx struggled to maintain its cohesion on the broken ground, Flamininus maneuvered his more adaptable legionaries for a devastating flanking attack. The once invincible Macedonian phalanx, unable to turn quickly to meet the sudden and violent threat on its side, completely crumbled under the Roman assault. The Roman soldiers, superior in close-quarters combat, poured into the gaps and wreaked havoc on the Macedonian lines. The result was a catastrophic and humiliating defeat for the Macedonians. The battlefield was a scene of utter carnage. An estimated 8,000 Macedonian soldiers were killed, and another 5,000 were captured, compared to the relatively light Roman losses of around 700 casualties. This single decisive victory completely shattered the myth of Macedonian invincibility, a myth that had persisted since the time of the legendary Alexander the Great. The entire Greek world, watching in awe and shock, now looked to Rome as the undisputed preeminent military power in the region. In the aftermath of the battle, a defeated and broken Philip V sued for peace. The terms imposed by Rome in the subsequent Peace of Tempea were intentionally and brutally harsh, a clear reflection of the totality of the Macedonian defeat. Philip was forced to completely evacuate all of his garrisons from Greece, including the strategic region of Thessaly. He had to surrender his entire naval fleet, pay a substantial and crippling war indemnity, and, in a final act of utter humiliation, he had to send his own son, Demetrius, to live in Rome as a hostage. This peace fundamentally and permanently altered the political landscape of the ancient Mediterranean. Philip V, once a powerful and ambitious king who dreamed of restoring the glory of his ancestors, was reduced to the status of a mere client king of Rome, his power and influence in the region utterly curtailed. This momentous event marked the definitive decline of Macedonian dominance and opened the door wide for further Roman interventions in Greek affairs, setting the stage for the eventual, complete subjugation of all of Greece under the might of Roman rule. As the dust began to settle from Rome's decisive victory over Macedon, a new challenger, like a great storm gathering on the eastern horizon, emerged to contest Rome's growing power. This was Antiochus III, the ambitious ruler of the vast Seleucid Empire, a man who styled himself the Great and had spent years diligently rebuilding his realm to rival the past glory of Alexander the Great. His considerable aspirations, however, would soon bring him into a direct and inevitable conflict with the rising power of the Roman Republic. Antiochus III had significantly expanded the Seleucid Empire during his reign, and his successful military campaigns against the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt had allowed him to gain control over crucial territories like Coile Syria. This had firmly established the Seleucid Empire as one of the largest and most powerful of the Hellenistic states. By the time he turned his ambitious gaze towards Greece, Antiochus effectively controlled a vast territory that stretched all the way from Asia Minor to the shores of the eastern Mediterranean. He was, quite naturally, alarmed by the expanding influence of Rome in Greece, following the defeat of his rival, Philip V of Macedon. He saw a golden opportunity to fill the power vacuum that had been left by Macedon's decline and to assert his own Seleucid dominance over the region. This powerful ambition, coupled with Rome's own growing concern over this new and powerful Eastern Empire, set the stage for a dramatic clash between these two formidable powers. As the tensions between them began to mount, Antiochus made a bold and provocative move, one that would further antagonize and alarm the Roman Republic. He welcomed into his court, as a trusted military advisor, the one man Rome feared more than any other, the brilliant, exiled Carthaginian general, Hannibal Barca. Can you imagine the alarm this must have caused in Rome? The memory of the Second Punic War, of Hannibal's elephants crossing the Alps, and of his crushing victories on Italian soil was still painfully fresh. The Roman Senate viewed this new alliance with the deepest and most profound suspicion, fearing that Hannibal's unmatched military genius, when combined with the immense resources of the Seleucid Empire, could pose a significant and perhaps even existential threat to Roman interests and security. The conflict began in earnest when Antiochus, who was encouraged by some of the Greek city-states, including the Aetolian League, who now resented Roman interference in their affairs, crossed into Greece with his army. He achieved some initial successes, gaining control of key areas and rallying support among those who wished to throw off the yoke of Roman influence. However, the Roman response was, as always, swift and utterly decisive. The turning point of the war in Greece came at the legendary Battle of Thermopylae in the year 191 BC. Here, at the same narrow pass where the 300 Spartans had made their famous last stand against the Persian Empire centuries before, Antiochus, with a force of around 12,000 foot soldiers and 500 cavalry, attempted to defend his position against a larger and better organized Roman army. Despite his careful defensive strategy, which involved constructing walls and positioning his troops to block the Roman advance, the Roman commander Lucius Scipio effectively coordinated his forces to exploit the weaknesses in the Seleucid position. The battle was a crushing and humiliating defeat for Antiochus. His army was outflanked and it suffered heavy casualties, with over 10,000 of his troops lost, while Roman losses were comparatively light. This decisive victory shattered Antiochus's hopes of establishing a strong foothold in Greece and forced him to abandon his ambitions there, retreating back to the relative safety of Asia Minor. The conflict finally culminated in the Great Battle of Magnesia in the year 190 BC, where Antiochus the Great made his final, desperate stand against the relentless Roman onslaught. Despite fielding a diverse and truly formidable army, which included war elephants and powerful heavy cavalry, Antiochus's forces were simply unable to withstand the disciplined might and superior tactics of the Roman legions and their allies. The battle ended in another catastrophic defeat for the Seleucid Empire, one which effectively ended its aspirations of dominance in the Eastern Mediterranean, once and for all. The consequences of the Roman-Seleucid War were severe and final for Antiochus and his once great empire. The peace treaty that was imposed by Rome included harsh and crippling terms, such as a massive war indemnity that would drain the Seleucid treasury and significant territorial losses. The Seleucids were compelled to withdraw completely from all of their territories in Europe and Asia Minor west of the formidable Taurus Mountains. These crippling restrictions marked the beginning of a long and irreversible decline for the once mighty Seleucid Empire. Antiochus, the very king who had sought to restore its former glory and had styled himself the Great, had instead presided over its rapid diminishment as a major power in the Hellenistic world, leaving Rome as the undisputed master of the Eastern Mediterranean. In the wake of Rome's great victories, the Macedonian kingdom, which had for so long been a dominant power in the Greek world, lay humbled and divided. Yet the spirit of Macedonian pride, forged by centuries of history, stretching back to Alexander the Great, was not yet entirely extinguished. A new king, Perseus, the son of Philip the Firm, ascended to the Macedonian throne in the year 179 BC. He inherited a kingdom that was still reeling from the humiliating defeat his father had suffered at the hands of the Romans, and he embarked on a calculated and ambitious campaign to restore Macedon's former glory. He began by investing heavily in rebuilding his military capabilities, diligently replenishing the ranks of the once feared phalanx, and carefully bolstering the kingdom's weakened economic foundations. Simultaneously, Perseus engaged in a shrewd and ambitious diplomatic offensive, patiently forging new alliances with various Greek states in a determined attempt to build a coalition that could one day challenge Roman hegemony in the region. But do you think for a moment that Rome, with its vast network of allies and spies, was not watching? The Roman Senate, ever vigilant of any potential threats to its growing dominance, watched every one of Perseus's maneuvers with an increasing and profound suspicion. Their concerns were further fueled by urgent reports from their allies in the region, particularly from Eumenes II of Pergamon, who saw the resurgence of Macedonian power under Perseus as a direct and immediate threat to his own kingdom. As tensions began to mount, the delicate balance of power in the region once again began to shift, setting the stage for a new and decisive confrontation that would determine the final fate of the Hellenistic world. The Third Macedonian War finally erupted in the year 171 BC, as Rome moved preemptively to crush any further expansion of Macedonian power before it could become a serious threat. The long and arduous conflict reached its dramatic and bloody climax at the Great Battle of Pydna in the year 168 BC. Here, two powerful armies and two distinct military philosophies would clash. The formidable Roman legions, under the command of the experienced and respected general Lucius Aemilius Paulus, faced off against the rebuilt and formidable Macedonian phalanx, led by King Perseus himself. The engagement unfolded on uneven and broken terrain, a fact that would prove to be utterly fatal for the Macedonians. The rigid, tightly packed phalanx, so incredibly powerful and almost unbeatable on flat, open ground, struggled immensely to maintain its cohesion and its impenetrable wall of spears on the rough landscape. Paulus, a brilliant and experienced tactician, expertly exploited this critical weakness. He employed a flexible and devastating combination of heavy infantry and cavalry, a formation that could swiftly respond to the changing dynamics of the battlefield. As the battle raged, the Roman forces executed a series of targeted attacks that were designed to disrupt the phalanx's unity. As the long Macedonian line struggled and bent across the uneven ground, small gaps began to appear in its formation. The highly trained Roman soldiers, who were superior in close-quarters combat, immediately exploited these openings, rushing in to engage the Macedonian troops in brutal, hand-to-hand fighting, where the long and cumbersome sarissa spears became more of a hindrance than a help. The once invincible Macedonian formation, unable to adapt or maneuver, completely crumbled under the relentless Roman onslaught. The result was a catastrophic and total defeat for Perseus and the Macedonians. Thousands of his soldiers fell in the combat, and Perseus himself barely escaped capture, fleeing the battlefield in disgrace. The defeat at Pydna marked the absolute and definitive end of Macedonian independence. It was the final, tragic collapse of the great Antigonid dynasty, which had ruled the kingdom since the time of Alexander the Great. Perseus sought sanctuary on the remote island of Samothrace, but he was soon captured by the Romans and brought back to Rome. There, he was forced to march in the magnificent triumphal parade of the victorious general, Paulus, a deeply humiliating public spectacle that symbolized the complete and utter subjugation of the once mighty Macedonian kingdom. In the aftermath of the war, the Roman Senate implemented a radical and ruthless reorganization of the conquered territory. They were determined to ensure that Macedonian power could never again rise to challenge them. The kingdom was systematically dismantled, divided into 4 separate and semi-autonomous regions, a move which effectively destroyed the centralized monarchy that had been the source of its strength and unity for centuries. The consequences of the Third Macedonian War reverberated throughout the entire Mediterranean world. It marked a major turning point in the Hellenistic era, signaling the final, irreversible decline of the great successor kingdoms that had dominated the Eastern Mediterranean since the death of Alexander. The fall of Macedon left a great power vacuum in the region, a vacuum that Rome was more than ready to fill, accelerating its transformation into the sole, dominant power of the Mediterranean world, and setting the stage for the final absorption of Greece itself. We have seen how Britain's empire expanded across the vastness of the Atlantic and into the ancient heart of Asia. But how was any of this truly possible for a nation that was, at its core, a relatively small island? How did it protect its sprawling network of colonies and its vital, globe-spanning trade routes, all separated by thousands of miles of unpredictable and often hostile ocean? The answer lies not in the size of its armies on land, but in the sturdy timber of its ships, the exceptional skill of its sailors, and the thunderous power of its cannons. This is the story of the Royal Navy, the true cornerstone and the ultimate guarantor of the British Empire's power. The story of Britain's naval supremacy began humbly, its seeds planted by forward-thinking monarchs like Henry VII, who first recognized the immense strategic importance of a strong, state-funded navy. He invested heavily in modern shipbuilding, creating a fleet that could not only defend England's shores, but could also begin to project power outwards. He established the great naval dockyards in places like Portsmouth and Chatham, the very places that would one day build the world's greatest warships. However, it was during the long and eventful reign of Queen Elizabeth I that England truly emerged as a formidable naval contender, ready to challenge the established giants of the sea. The single defining moment of this era, a legendary tale of defiance against a superpower, came in the year 1588 with the epic defeat of the Spanish Armada. The vast Spanish fleet, thought to be invincible, sailed with immense confidence to conquer England. But in the narrow waters of the English Channel, the smaller, more agile and more maneuverable English ships, commanded by brilliant seamen, outfought the massive and cumbersome Spanish galleons. This stunning victory, aided by fierce storms that scattered the retreating Spanish fleet, not only secured England's independence from the threat of Spanish domination, but also established the foundation for all of Britain's future naval ambitions. It was a profound psychological turning point that infused the nation with a newfound confidence in its maritime destiny. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Britain's growing naval power had become inextricably linked to its economic and territorial expansion. The Royal Navy's primary, day-to-day mission was the protection of the vast web of trade routes that connected Britain to its increasingly valuable colonies. It was the guardian of the ships, carrying precious cargoes of sugar from the Caribbean, tobacco from Virginia, and fine textiles from India across the vastness of the oceans. It was the ever-present shield against Britain's fierce European rivals, nations like France, Spain, and the Netherlands, who all competed fiercely for control of these lucrative overseas territories and their trade. The 7 Years' War, a conflict so widespread it is often referred to as the First True World War, was where the Royal Navy's dominance at sea proved to be the decisive factor. In battles fought across the globe, from the coasts of North America to the shores of India, the Navy enabled Britain to transport troops, maintain supply lines, and ultimately capture key French territories, including Canada and crucial holdings in India. The end of the war in 1763 established Britain as the preeminent global power. This naval dominance was further and most famously cemented during the Napoleonic Wars. While Napoleon's seemingly invincible armies marched across the continent of Europe, the Royal Navy, under the command of brilliant and audacious leaders like Admiral Horatio Nelson, established a crushing blockade of French ports, effectively cutting off Napoleon's empire from the trade and resources it needed to survive. This long struggle culminated in the legendary Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Here, Nelson, employing brilliant but risky tactics, decisively defeated the combined navies of France and Spain, securing Britain's absolute control of the seas for the next century. The final defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo in 1815 marked the beginning of a long period of relative global peace, often referred to as the Pax Britannica, or British peace, a peace that was largely maintained and enforced by the unchallenged power of the Royal Navy. What made the Royal Navy so successful? It was a powerful combination of technological innovation, skilled leadership, and a brilliant global strategy. British shipbuilders were at the forefront of maritime technology, designing faster, more durable vessels like the heavily armed ships of the line, which gave them a significant advantage in fleet battles. Later, in the 19th century, Britain led the critical transition from the age of sail to the age of steam. The introduction of steamships, less dependent on the whims of the wind, revolutionized naval warfare and commerce, allowing the Royal Navy to maintain its technological edge with faster and more reliable vessels. This technological superiority was supported by a global strategy centered on a network of fortified naval bases and coaling stations. Ports like Gibraltar, Malta, Aden, Singapore, and Hong Kong became a string of pearls around the globe, ensuring that British ships could operate effectively, refuel, and make repairs anywhere in the world. This network allowed Britain to control the key maritime choke points of global trade, such as the Straits of Malacca and the Cape of Good Hope. The Navy was far more than just a defensive shield. It was a primary tool of imperial expansion and policy enforcement. In the 19th century, Royal Navy patrols were instrumental in the complex and often contradictory mission of suppressing the transatlantic slave trade off the coast of West Africa. At the same time, in Asia, it was British naval forces that defeated the Chinese Empire during the Opium Wars, using their firepower to secure trade concessions and territorial gains like Hong Kong. The Royal Navy's dominance reached its absolute peak during the late 19th century, when its size and capability were completely unmatched. However, this dominance eventually came under threat with the rise of other industrial and naval powers, particularly Germany and the United States, leading to a costly naval arms race in the early 20th century. Naval supremacy was the undeniable cornerstone of Britain's imperial success, the bedrock upon which its trade, its power, and its influence were built. But it was also a constant reminder of the empire's ultimate reliance on military force to sustain its dominance on the world stage. As the Roman legions marched triumphantly across Greece, and as Greek ideas in turn were quietly infiltrating the city of Rome, a profound cultural exchange began that would reshape the empire in ways no one could have predicted. The initial Roman attitudes towards Greek culture were deeply complex, marked by a powerful mixture of profound admiration and deep-seated suspicion. On one hand, many educated Romans greatly respected the incredible Greek achievements in the fields of philosophy, art, and literature. But on the other hand, they also viewed many Greek customs as decadent and potentially corrupting to their own traditional Roman virtues of practicality, discipline, and civic duty. A staunch defender of these traditional Roman values, the famous statesman Cato the Elder, even advocated for the expulsion of all Greek philosophers from the city, fearing their corrupting influence on the youth of Rome. Yet, despite this initial resistance from some quarters, the gradual infiltration of Greek ideas and practices into the very heart of Roman society soon became an unstoppable force. One of the primary and most effective channels for this incredible cultural exchange was the widespread practice among wealthy Roman families of employing Greek slaves and tutors to educate their children. This seemingly innocuous custom had far-reaching and profound consequences, as it systematically exposed the entire next generation of Roman elites, the future leaders, generals, and thinkers of the Republic, to the richness of Greek language, its literature, and its sophisticated philosophical thought from their earliest and most formative years. The impact of Greek philosophy on Roman intellectual life was particularly significant and transformative. The great schools of thought that had originated in the bustling forums of Athens soon found fertile, new ground in the city of Rome, where they were eagerly absorbed, debated, and adapted. Stoicism, with its powerful emphasis on virtue, rationality, and a stern sense of duty, found a particular and deep resonance among the Roman elites, as its principles aligned so perfectly with their own traditional ideals of governance and personal conduct. Great Roman thinkers like Seneca and Cicero masterfully integrated Stoic principles into their own influential works on ethics and public life, adapting the Greek ideas to a Roman context. The influence of Stoicism extended all the way into the corridors of power, with many Roman leaders, including the great philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, embracing its principles as a personal guide for their rule. Other Greek schools of thought also left their indelible mark on Roman society. Epicureanism, with its focus on the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, challenged traditional Roman notions of virtue and influenced new Roman approaches to personal happiness and ethical conduct. This incredible fusion of Greek and Roman philosophical traditions even led to the emergence of entirely new schools of thought, like Neoplatonism, which would itself later exert a profound influence on the development of early Christian theology. The adoption of these Greek philosophical methods encouraged a more critical and analytical approach to knowledge throughout Roman society. This, in turn, led to significant advancements in a variety of fields, from rhetoric and literature to science and mathematics. Even the famous Roman legal system, which would become the foundation for many modern legal codes, was deeply infused with Greek philosophical principles of equity and the concept of natural law. This powerful cross-pollination of ideas led to a rich and vibrant cultural synthesis. Roman authors began to adopt Greek literary forms and themes, creating a new and powerful hybrid literature that beautifully blended Greek sophistication with Roman practicality and grandeur. The visual arts and architecture were not immune to this cultural exchange. Greek architectural styles heavily influenced Roman buildings, with the adoption of their elegant columns, their intricate friezes, and their other decorative elements becoming commonplace across the empire. This architectural synthesis not only transformed the physical landscape of the city of Rome, but also served as a powerful and visible symbol of the deep cultural integration that was taking place. As these various strands of Greek culture continued to weave themselves into the very fabric of Roman society, a unique and powerful Greco-Roman culture began to emerge. It was a new entity, neither purely Greek nor purely Roman, but one that drew its immense strength and vitality from both of these great traditions. In a strange and beautiful irony, Greek culture came to dominate the intellectual and artistic life of Rome, even as Roman political and military power held absolute sway over the entire Mediterranean world. The military conquest of Greece had initiated a process that would fundamentally alter the very identity of Rome itself, creating a new intellectual and artistic framework that would go on to influence the course of all of Western civilization for centuries to come. The transformation of Greece under Roman rule marked a profound and fundamental shift in the political, social, and cultural landscape of the ancient world, as Greece transitioned from a diverse collection of fiercely independent city-states and leagues into a single, unified Roman province. The very fabric of Greek society underwent significant and permanent changes. This societal transition mirrored the military conquest that had preceded it. You can almost picture the Roman legions marching across the Hellenic landscape, their polished shields and crimson cloaks a stark and uniform contrast to the varied armies of the old Greek polis. The new political reality saw the establishment of Roman governance structures that systematically supplanted the old local systems, effectively diminishing Greek autonomy in a final and irreversible way. In a great historical irony, the Roman general Titus Quinctius Flamininus, after defeating the Macedonians years earlier, had stood before the Greeks at the Isthmian Games and declared them all to be free and independent. This proclamation, however, only foreshadowed the complex and often unequal power dynamics that would truly emerge under the full weight of Roman dominion. Initially, there was a natural and widespread resistance to this new Roman cultural influence among the Greek populace. Many Greeks, deeply proud of their long and storied history of philosophy, art, and democracy, sought to preserve their traditional practices and maintain their unique local identities in the face of this growing Roman dominance. However, the inexorable and undeniable march of Roman power gradually eroded this resistance, paving the way for a complex and fascinating process of cultural integration and exchange. As time progressed, the Greek elites in particular began to recognize the potential benefits of aligning themselves with the new Roman system. The vast Roman administrative framework offered unprecedented new opportunities for ambitious and talented Greeks to gain power and prominence within the broader imperial structure. This clever co-option of local elites into the machinery of Roman governance, a hallmark of Roman imperial policy, greatly facilitated the cultural exchange that would ultimately reshape both societies. As Roman dominion solidified, the once fiercely independent Greek city-states found themselves integrated into a vast imperial system that prioritized, above all else, stability and prosperity. This new paradigm, which would come to be known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, while initially met with resentment, gradually ushered in a period of unprecedented peace and development across the entire Greek world. The constant, draining intercity conflicts and rivalries that had plagued Greece for centuries finally ceased under the watchful eye of Rome. The establishment of a unified economic framework, protected by Roman law and the Roman legions, created conditions that were highly conducive to growth and commerce. Greek cities, long accustomed to the terrible uncertainties of warfare and political upheaval, now experienced a prolonged period of stability that allowed for significant urban development and a great flourishing of their cultural life. Roman policies aimed at maintaining this peace had far-reaching consequences for Greek society. The establishment of client states and the integration of those local elites into the Roman administrative framework helped to stabilize entire regions and to reduce organized resistance. This approach not only ensured Roman control, but also created new avenues for social mobility among the Greeks. Ambitious individuals now found new pathways to status and influence, as they could rise through merit and service to the empire, rather than solely through birth or citizenship in a particular city-state. The very urban landscape of Greece underwent a remarkable transformation during the Pax Romana. Great cities like Athens and Corinth experienced a powerful revival in trade and cultural activities, benefiting from major Roman infrastructure projects that improved connectivity and commerce. The construction of high-quality roads and great aqueducts enhanced the quality of life for urban dwellers and facilitated the movement of goods, ideas, and people across the empire. This increased interconnectedness only accelerated the blending of Greek and Roman cultures, laying the essential groundwork for a truly Greco-Roman civilization. Even education and intellectual life experienced significant shifts. The traditional Greek educational system began to incorporate elements of Roman education, while the powerful Greek intellectual traditions, as we have seen, continued to exert a profound influence on Roman thought, creating a rich cultural synthesis. Despite its political subjugation, Greece maintained and even enhanced its status as a great center of learning, a wellspring of art, philosophy, and literature within the Roman Empire. The peace brought by Roman rule both preserved and transformed Greek civilization. The economic interdependence that developed ensured that Roman control over the Greek territories was not merely maintained by force, but was woven deeply into the very fabric of daily life, creating a new and enduring Greco-Roman reality that would last for centuries. You are absolutely right, and thank you for the feedback. My apologies if the previous section felt too brief. You are correct that a topic as significant as the challenges that led to the decline of an empire deserves a much deeper and more expansive exploration. I will take your suggestion and rewrite Part 9, incorporating more of a question and answer style to delve into the details and significantly increase the length and narrative depth. Let's revisit this crucial chapter and give it the detail it deserves. We have explored the vast reach of the British Empire, an entity of immense power, wealth, and profound cultural influence. which at its peak seemed as permanent and unshakable as a great mountain range. But no empire, no matter how mighty, is eternal. Its dominance was constantly being tested, both by powerful external rivals and by the growing unyielding currents of unrest from within its own vast territories. So, what were the first signs of trouble? What were the cracks that began to appear in this seemingly indestructible foundation? A series of profound challenges that would, over time, ultimately contribute to the empire's final, inevitable decline. The first great crack, and perhaps one of the most significant and shocking challenges, came not from a rival European power, but from Britain's own colonial children. Could an empire truly be defeated by its own subjects? The late 18th century provided a stunning answer. The 13 American colonies, which had been so integral to the success of Britain's Atlantic Empire, began to rebel. Why did they take such a drastic step? The sources of their discontent were numerous and deep-seated, centering on what they saw as deeply unjust grievances over taxation without any form of representation in the British Parliament, and frustrating, heavy-handed restrictions on their trade and their westward expansion. The resulting conflict, the American Revolution, which raged from 1775 to 1783, was a costly and deeply humiliating defeat for the British Crown. It resulted in the permanent loss of a vast and economically vital part of its empire. But the impact was far more than just territorial. It was profoundly psychological. The independence of the United States was the first major, shattering blow to the aura of British invincibility. It was a powerful and resonant demonstration to the rest of the world that colonial subjects could, in fact, successfully stand up to and defeat their imperial masters, a lesson that would not be forgotten. After losing its American colonies, did Britain's ambition wane? Far from it. The empire simply shifted its focus with even greater intensity, expanding to unprecedented new levels in the great continents of Asia and Africa. But these new territories brought with them their own fierce challenges and powerful forms of resistance. What happened in India in the mid-19th century that sent shockwaves through the entire imperial system? In 1857, the Great Indian Rebellion erupted, an event also known as the Sepoy Mutiny. This massive uprising was sparked by a deep well of discontent among the Indian soldiers, the Sepoys, who served in the British East India Company's army. The immediate cause was their belief that the new rifle cartridges they were being issued were greased with animal fat, a practice that offended both their Hindu and their Muslim religious beliefs. This single issue was the spark that ignited a subcontinent as local rulers and peasants, tired of the exploitation of company rule, joined the fight against British authority. Although the British eventually and brutally suppressed the uprising, the event exposed the deep weaknesses and simmering resentments at the heart of their rule in India. It led directly to the British government dissolving the East India Company and assuming direct control of the subcontinent. But it also left a lasting and painful legacy of distrust and animosity, a wound that would never truly heal and would fuel the growing desire for complete independence for generations to come. But can an empire, even one that seems all-powerful, simply collapse under its own immense weight? The economic challenges facing the British Empire were enormous. Maintaining such a global enterprise required almost unimaginable financial resources. The sheer costs of administering dozens of colonies, building thousands of miles of railways and other infrastructure, and, above all, defending a global network of trade routes placed a heavy and continuous burden on the British economy. Wars, in particular, were financially draining. The long Napoleonic Wars, though ultimately a victory, left the country deeply in debt. Later, conflicts like the Boer Wars in South Africa were costly military campaigns that not only strained the treasury, but also exposed the limits of British military power and drew significant international criticism. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this economic strain was compounded by a new threat: growing competition from other rising industrialized nations, particularly a unified and ambitious Germany and the powerful United States. These emerging powers began to challenge Britain's long-held economic and military dominance, leading to intense international rivalries, such as the naval arms race with Germany, which forced Britain to pour even more of its precious resources into simply maintaining its fleet. What, then, was the final blow? What events were so catastrophic that they made the continuation of the empire impossible? The answer lies in the two great world wars of the 20th century. World War I placed unprecedented demands on Britain, requiring it to mobilize resources and manpower from every corner of its empire. Colonies such as India, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand made immense contributions, sending hundreds of thousands of their young men to fight and die on the battlefields of Europe. While this demonstrated the interconnectedness of the empire, the immense sacrifices made by these colonial populations also ignited a powerful new demand for greater autonomy and self-rule. The war left Britain victorious, but deeply scarred and economically weakened. Then came World War II, an even greater and more devastating challenge. Britain again emerged victorious, but at a terrible cost. It was economically devastated, its infrastructure at home was damaged, and its financial resources were almost completely depleted. The war also exposed the vulnerability of the empire, as key territories, like the impregnable fortress of Singapore, fell to enemy forces. Britain's reliance on support from the United States and the Soviet Union during the war signaled a definitive shift in global power. By the end of the war, it was painfully clear that Britain no longer had the wealth or the will to maintain its vast empire in the face of the final, unstoppable force: nationalism. With Britain weakened, what was this force that finally rose up to dismantle the empire piece by piece? All across the world, in the colonies, movements for independence, which had been simmering for decades, grew into a mighty and irresistible tide. In India, great leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru spearheaded the long struggle for independence. They did so not primarily with armies and weapons, but with powerful and inspiring campaigns of non-violent resistance and civil disobedience. The growing unrest during and after World War II made it increasingly difficult and politically untenable for Britain to justify its presence. Finally, in 1947, facing immense pressure, Britain granted independence to India and Pakistan, an event that marked the true beginning of the age of decolonization. Similar movements erupted across Africa. Nationalist leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya mobilized their populations to demand their freedom. Uprisings like the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya highlighted the growing violence and the ultimate untenability of colonial rule. By the 1960s, a wave of independence had swept the continent, and the Great British Empire began to systematically unravel as colony after colony claimed its independence. The cumulative effect of these relentless challenges, from military defeats and economic crises to the powerful and undeniable call of nationalism, had finally led to the inevitable decline of the largest empire the world has ever known, reshaping the map of the world for. The British Empire, at its absolute peak, was a colossal entity, spanning the entire globe and encompassing nearly a quarter of the world's landmass and population. Although the empire officially dissolved in the turbulent decades of the mid-20th century, its legacy continues to influence our modern world in ways both visible and invisible. From the language many of us speak to the political and economic systems that govern our lives, the imprint of the British Empire is both enduring and multifaceted. This legacy, however, is also marked by profound and often painful contradictions. It is a story of development that was often built upon exploitation, of unity forged through division, and of progress that was frequently accompanied by immense suffering. What then is the most visible and widespread legacy of the British Empire? You might be hearing it or reading it right now. It is the global use of the English language. Today, English is spoken by over 1.5 billion people, making it one of the most widely used languages in the entire world. In many former British colonies, including vast and populous nations like India, Nigeria, and South Africa, English still serves as an official or a primary second language. often facilitating communication across incredibly diverse local linguistic groups. The dominance of English in the modern spheres of international business, science, and technology can be traced directly back to the British Empire's global reach. However, this linguistic legacy is not without controversy, as the promotion and establishment of English often came at the great expense of rich and ancient indigenous languages and cultures. How did the empire shape the way many nations govern themselves today? It left behind a distinct political blueprint. Many former colonies, upon gaining their independence, adopted the model of parliamentary democracy, a system inspired directly by Britain's own system of governance. Great nations such as Canada, Australia, and India still retain political structures, legal systems, and constitutions that clearly reflect this profound British influence. The English common law system, for instance, which was introduced during the colonial period, remains the very foundation of the legal frameworks in numerous countries, from Jamaica to Kenya to Singapore. While these institutions provided a degree of political continuity after independence, they were also often accompanied by immense challenges, as these newly independent nations had to grapple with the complex legacies of the often authoritarian colonial administrations that had preceded them. Did the empire create global prosperity, or did it create global inequality? The economic legacy is just as complex. The establishment of vast, global trade networks during the imperial period laid the very groundwork for the interconnected world we live in today. The ports, the railroads, and the other infrastructure built during the time of British rule certainly facilitated the movement of goods and people, integrating distant colonies into the global market. However, these systems were almost always designed to serve imperial interests first and foremost, prioritizing the extraction of raw materials from the colonies over the development of robust local industries. This exploitation often left many former colonies in a state of economic dependence on Britain, a situation which has, in many cases, hindered their ability to achieve true self-sufficiency even after independence, contributing to economic disparities that persist to this day. Is there a positive legacy of connection that remains from this vast empire? One of the most enduring aspects is the creation of the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary organisation that comprises 56 member states, most of which are former British colonies. This organisation aims to promote economic cooperation, cultural exchange, and political dialogue among its members, serving as a living symbol of a shared, albeit incredibly complex, history and a set of shared values. Culturally, the exchange flowed in both directions. While Britain exported its literature and its sports, with cricket famously becoming a national passion and a source of pride in India and the West Indies, it was also profoundly influenced by the cultures of its colonies. Indian cuisine, for example, has become an integral and beloved part of modern British culture. However, this legacy is also marked by the painful suppression of indigenous traditions, a history of forced assimilation that many nations are still grappling with today. But what of the wounds that have not healed? What are the most painful parts of this legacy? We can see them in the very maps of our modern world. The arbitrary borders drawn by British administrators during the colonial period, particularly during the scramble for Africa, often completely ignored existing ethnic, cultural, and historical divisions among people. This legacy has directly contributed to political instability and conflicts that persist to this day. Similarly, the partition of India in 1947, which divided the subcontinent into the nations of India and Pakistan, led to mass displacement, horrific communal violence, and ongoing tensions between the two nations. The transatlantic slave trade, in which Britain played a central role for centuries, remains one of the darkest chapters in its history. And so, in recent years, there has been a growing and important debate about how to address this difficult legacy. Movements such as Rhodes Must Fall have called for a critical re-evaluation of imperial figures and symbols, statues of colonial leaders, the naming of institutions, and the way imperial history is taught in schools have all come under intense scrutiny. These debates reflect the difficult but necessary questions that nations must ask as they confront their colonial pasts. The legacy of the British Empire is, therefore, undeniable, a complex tapestry woven with threads of progress and pain, unity and division, exploitation and development. Its story is a profound reminder of the incredible forces that have shaped our modern world. And with that final thought, our long journey through the rise and fall of this great empire comes to its close. It is a story of immense ambition and profound consequence. Now, let the echoes of this history fade into the quiet of your mind. It is time for history to rest, and it is time for you to rest as well. Good night, and have peaceful dreams.